This is your foundation. How to successfully grow your wedding business. Weddings Made Simple.
I trust by now you're quickly becoming an expert colorist by mastering the process stack, and consequently adding so much more value to your work and making yourself a more sought-after artist in the industry. But as impossible as it sounds, we can still take you to another level. In this video, I'll teach you the secret sauce, cherry on top extracurriculars, and how to incorporate them into your workflow, which will separate you from the rest of your competition. First, we're going to talk about the HSL curves, which we already touched on a little bit. So let's look at what we have going on here in Resolve. So let's go ahead and add our HSL node right before our LUT. Let's go ahead and name that. So for example, what we can do is we could rotate our entire image on the axis and just create some crazy colors with it. Obviously, we're not ever going to have to do this for a wedding. But one of the nice things you can do about this is you can shift certain hues. So for example, why don't we try to just get this Ferrari right where the red channel is supposed to be? So if we just take our reds, we can even just grab that vector there. And if we just pull this up right there, I mean, we can be subtle about it. But I mean, look at the control that we can have over certain parts of our image. We could make it a purple or a pink Ferrari, which would not be quite as appealing, but that's what we can do with hue versus hue. We can do the same thing with saturation. Maybe we wanted to make the sky a little bit deeper. We can do that. Just grab that area and just pull that. For hue versus luminance, what we can do is take any color and then just we can make it brighter, we can make it darker according to our needs. We do have to be very, very careful. We have to be very careful on all of these curves, but this one in particular, usually we don't ever have to use it, but it might be helpful. So in this case, say we're really looking for a deep blue sky, we can just take that, and we do want to keep this fairly wide for the sake of how quickly the image can break down in this, using this curve, but we could do that. We can make that sky pretty deep. We could also make it brighter if we wanted to. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's talk about luminance versus saturation. Now, this is a really powerful tool, especially with weddings, where we're dealing with crazy mixed lighting. A lot of it's indoor, and we don't have control over, if the overhead super yellow lights are on. And so, why don't we do this? Let's go ahead and go in here, and let's just break something. Let's make the gain. Let's turn the gain to this orangish color, and say we've done all we could do on our lift gamma gain wheels already to fix this. Now what we can do is just take it one little extra step using our HSL curves. After we've done all that we can do with our gain, our gamma, our highlight adjustment tools, and our temperature, kind of a last thing that we can do is use our luminance versus saturation. So if we look at this graph here, this is the whites, the brightest portions of your image, and this is black. And so we notice that the yellow tint is really affecting just kind of the brightest portions of the shot. And so what we can do is just take our white point, and we can just drag it down towards, this is desaturated, and then this is saturated. So we can pull this down to desaturate that top end. Now again, this isn't an invitation to use this in place of proper white balance. Again, this is just an extracurricular thing you can do just to make that white balance absolutely pristine. And so even with this here, what we can do is we're seeing it's having a little too much effect on the rest of it, so we can just take this area, just bring that back up slightly, and maybe bring this down a little bit more. Okay? The saturation versus saturation curve is also a really helpful tool like the luminance versus saturation that will really help in wedding scenarios where we don't have a ton of control over the lighting environment. So what it does, this end of the graph is the most saturated portions of the image, and this end of the spectrum are the least saturated portions of the image. So for example, if you're working with, maybe it's a white barn wedding, and you've done all that you can do to correct the white balance to get those skin tones pristine. However, that white barn is still looking like this ugly greenish yellow. What you can do, if it's maybe in an already saturated, maybe it's a forest with a bright red barn door, the white walls of the barn will be the least saturated portion of the image, along with the bride's dress, which is also supposed to be white. And so what we can do is we can take the least saturated portions of our image and then just desaturate them. Clearly, that's not the best option for this shot here, but it's a very useful tool to have in your belt. What you can also do is take the most saturated portions of your image and say those are a little bit out of control, maybe during the party dancing scene where you have some crazy LED lights flying all over the place. Maybe what you could do is just take your most intensely saturated parts of your image and then just pull that down a little bit, which you can see that happens a little bit here in the red of the car. Okay, and then lastly, we have saturation versus luminance. I would not recommend using this very often, but I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's the opposite of luminance versus saturation. So we have our least saturated parts of the image here, most saturated parts of the image here, and we are now increasing the luminance of those areas. If you want a more visual representation of what this does, you can also use some color warper tools where you can see you can affect different portions of the hue. So if I just turn this up to, say, 12, and I can take my reds, and this would be like a hue versus hue, where I shift that color. I can also do hue versus saturation, where I increase the saturation or desaturate that hue. So if you're a more visual person, this might be a better option than using the HSL curves.